Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2008 sketch comedy film, The Onion Movie. Now, this is a film that I had heard of because it's a sketch comedy film, and I do like watching these movies because it's like a sketch comedy anthology. That's basically what it is, and I like anthology films. A lot of these suck, but I still like to watch them because I like anthology films and I also like sketch comedy. Now, I wouldn't say that this is as bad as Epic Movie or Disaster Movie or those kind of movies, but that's not saying much because this still sucks and reeks like rancid onion rings for the most part. Uh, Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on the film, though, I would like to give a special shout out to Radic for requesting this review. Now, The Onion movie is directed by James Kleiner, and James Kleiner had really been a commercial guy. He had directed a bunch of commercials for brands like KFC, Altoids, and so on prior to getting the job to direct this, as well as some music videos. And I think that's really why he was hired to do this. He was somebody that the producers could hire for cheap and a guy who would get things done in very little takes and get it done as quickly as possible. And you can definitely sense that with this movie. It doesn't have a signature style to it. It doesn't have anything that stands out about it. It just looks very boring and bland and tasteless when it comes to its visual style. The framing is not particularly that great when it comes to the scenes. There's not really a lot of variety, originality when it comes to how the scenes are framed. And all the various different sketches, they don't really have a lot about them other than like the Melissa Cherry music video that stands out visually. They all look the same, and they all look like your average sketch from Mind of Mencia on Comedy Central, and that's not a good thing because Mind of Mencia sucks and is not known for having sketches that look particularly that great or are really any good to begin with. Uh, but because of the lower budget and because of the kind of project that this is, I'm not going to be too harsh on the director because I think he did the best that he could, considering it was a very low budget film and he probably had to shoot it in a very limited amount of time. And he was working with a script that was just an absolute mess, that was just a bunch of random jokes and sketches that are very loosely connected together. So, considering the circumstances, I think at the end of the day, Kleiner did an adequate enough job. A better director probably would have been able to elevate this a little bit more, but I don't think any significant talent in the directing department wanted anything to do with this movie. So this is like the best that the Onion movie was going to get. It's written by Todd Hanson and Robert D. Seagal, and I believe those are pseudonyms for like some other writers because they didn't have any faith in what they wrote. And you could definitely see why. This is not a good script, and this is not really a very good comedy film. It doesn't really feature a good ratio of successful, let alone humorous sketches. The concept of it had potential. You take The Onion, which is a clever, witty, satirical website, and you make a sketch comedy film about it. And you utilize the news broadcast format to structure the sketches. It involves a news broadcast of the Onion News, and you follow around the different anchors and the different people who work there, and then you have some news broadcasts that also are operating as sketches, and then you have stuff that's still centered around the news broadcast, like people who are watching the news broadcast and then call the news for a story or stuff like that. And because it's the Onion, you have a lot of moments where the anchor will say some headlines. And it's one of those screenplays where the concept is sound, but the execution is bad. The execution is, for the most part, awful. And it really starts with the headlines. And that's what The Onion is known for. And I didn't laugh or smirk or chuckle out of any of the headlines. There wasn't a single headline in this film that I thought was funny. And that's what The Onion's bread and butter is. So that is not a good thing. And that is definitely a bad sign. So the film opens up with this news broadcaster, this anchor man named Norm Archer, who is introducing the most recent episode of the Onion News. And he is saying these headlines that are outlandish, and then you cut to some sketches. And one of the first sketches is about this armed gunman who goes to a bank, and instead of asking for money, he asks for a job. And the setup is not that bad, and the payoff isn't that bad either, because an actual armed gunman who has the intent of robbing the bank shows up later after armed gunman got the job and actually got a promotion. And the real gunman shows up, and, well, maybe not the real gunman, but another gunman shows up, and he tries to rob the place, and then the armed gunman shoots him and then berates him for trying to rob the place, telling them that he should, make an honest living. So that was one of the, I think, honestly, 3 sketches that I thought was actually clever or at all funny. Another one is a TV spot for a new action film called Cock Puncher, starring Steven Seagal. And that was absurd and also quite hilarious. And it was really a lot of fun to see Steven Seagal parodying himself. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Seagal didn't know that it was supposed to be a parody. I could totally see Seagal being the kind of person who would just think he was making a serious movie. He was just, even though it's called Cock Puncher, he's like, well, yeah, I punch people in the cock, like, because I'm a badass. Like, I could totally see that. Like, he doesn't really know that it's a parody of himself. He just thought that it was a sincere movie called Cock Puncher. Like, honestly, that would not surprise me at all. But regardless, it was still fun to see Seagal in something like that. So with these sketches, it kind of starts off strong. And then it continues with another sketch that I liked about Melissa Cherry, who is a parody of Britney Spears during her peak pop princess era. And it's a satire of these pop princesses and their incredibly suggestive lyrics for their songs, and how oblivious the artists are about it. And I genuinely feel that the writing was actually pretty clever here. It was still very crass and over the top in a lot of ways in terms of how crude it was. I mean, with songs like Take Me From Behind and so on and so forth. But it was done in a way that actually felt like it was satirizing something in a clever way. And it was actually quite funny. And that was really about it for a long period of time when it comes to this film. Like, it started off somewhat decent, and then it really started to fall off in terms of the quality of the jokes and the comedy and the sketches. Because after that, we start to get a taste of the main plot, which is not that engaging or interesting at all. It deals with the news anchor guy and him not liking the fact that global tetrahedron, who has bought the news network, is having him do ads for the company, or ads will pop up in the middle of the broadcast. And that was just something that didn't do anything for me at all. It didn't even like do anything clever with it either in terms of like satirizing this bit of drama, other than trying to make a reference to network near the end and then just kind of leaving it at that. And there's this crisis going on between these fictional countries called Asmenistan and what is it? Sloravia or whatever. And you get a lot of dated racial comedy after this. And it was, you got a little bit of that early on with some of the headlines, but it still felt like, okay, they're doing something with it, with some of the sketches in a way that actually is clever and genuinely funny, like the armed gunman bit. But after that, it's just really lazy racial comedy. And I'm not the PC police by any means whatsoever, but when you get to stuff like the Al Kuyataya terrorist training film, which is just very painfully dated racial comedy about Arabs post 9/11, it's so painfully unfunny to me. And you have this other bit that's just so predictable, that involves this white guy who's acting like he's black, and you see these cops in a police car, and you're like, okay, they're going to arrest him because they think he's black. And that's exactly what happens. And it just drags on forever. And it's less funny the more it drags on. And I'm just like, come on, man. Like, that is so lazy. And there's a lot of that in this film. Just very lazy, uninspired racial comedy and sexist comedy and just lowest common denominator, like lame, offensive jokes. This whole thing about a celebrity roast parody that's parodying these old celebrity roasts from back in the day, but it's not a particularly clever parody at all, and it's not funny. Gay cruise ship commercials, this fourth wall breaking moment that continues throughout the movie with this show called Focus on Film, which is featuring a bunch of critics who are talking about the movie that they're watching. It's something that has potential, but it sucks. And it's not funny. And it's not clever. And it's just really more annoying than anything else when the movie stops to go back to this Focus on Film bit. And that's definitely a common problem with this movie. A lot of just repeated gags that just weren't really that funny the first time. And then the more that they keep doing it, it just becomes annoying. Because they're like, okay, I know where you're going with this, but it didn't work the first time around. Why do you think it's going to work the second or the third time? And just because you have lines of dialogue that say that you're aware of how bad your movie is and how lazy and uninspired the screenplay is, that doesn't give you an excuse to suck. I'm not gonna buy into the CinemaSins defense here, where oh well they're aware of how bad it is, so you can't criticize them because they have a bit where they satirize and poke fun at the people who will criticize the movie and call them gay wads. So, you know, you can't make the same argument. No, I can, and I will, and it definitely fits. It's a very uninspired, lazy comedy full of a lot of lazy, uninspired sketches. There's a thing about little known racial stereotypes that's just really bad. There's one about Peruvians who are like superheroes and have laser eyes. There's this whole rape joke, a segment and sketch that's about a rape mystery game, and it's just about as funny as it sounds. That was, in my opinion, a really tasteless, really unfunny sketch, and I don't even know what it was trying to get across. I don't even know what it was trying to satirize, other than a murder mystery game. But instead of it being a murder mystery, it's a rape, and it also is very predictable in terms of the comedy, like a lot of these sketches are. And if they're not predictable, it's just random. And I'm not a fan of random lull comedy most of the time. You also get this other thing about prisoners, convicts who are taken into families who live in the suburbs, and it doesn't really do that much with it. It's not really that funny. It's about as funny as one of the earlier bits about a news broadcast about a husband who lost his socks because their neighbor's house blew up and they called the Onion News, and the joke is that they don't cover the house blowing up, they cover the husband's missing socks. There's a lot of dumb comedy in this too, and that's definitely one of them. Keeps cutting back to cock puncher stuff too. There's a random sketch about a company that gets your dick out of things. Yes, because there's a sketch about this guy who likes to stick his dick into things like a mail slot, and he gets his, I think actually it's a library return slot, and his dick is stuck. And then it cuts to a commercial about this company that gets your dick out of things. Like, what? It's not even satirizing anything. It's just a dumb joke. This whole thing with this guy who invented a landmine, he's trying to sell it to the military, and they refuse to take the deal. So then he has to start selling it on TV as a way to get rid of weeds. Or this bit about a computer called the Bates 4000, and the joke is very tired and lame. It's just like, oh, hey, as soon as you buy the Bates 4000, it's a piece of shit and it's already outdated. And there's the new one that's out. And I'm like, that is a very uninspired joke. Not very really clever and not really satirizing much of anything either, like, to be perfectly honest. That's just true. When it comes to like how outdated computers get rather quickly. There's a whole thing with this D&D guy, which I will admit this was the last sketch of the film that actually got a laugh out of me. This D&D guy, played by Jed Rees, who was in Galaxy Quest as one of the aliens. And he's this just overly cocky, grown ass man who plays in these D&D tournaments at like the local library or something, and he never plays fair. He just destroys all everybody in the game and makes it not fun. And then he says that he wishes he could be in the realm of fantasy because he's so good with his character Proteus. And he actually winds up getting his wish, and he gets taken to the realm of fantasy, and he gets his ass kicked. And I was like, okay, that was funny. Is it a satire of anything that's related to society or anything you would actually see in The Onion? Not really, but it's a fun one-off sketch. And really, what makes it work is Jed Rees. He's just great in it. But the rest of the sketches are just huge whiffs for me. Keeps on going with focus on film. It keeps on going with some other random, references to Cockpuncher again. You have this whole thing with What About the Children with Michael Bolton, and the joke is that, oh, in these places where you have these kids who are not doing that well, and you're giving all this money to them, uh, they have really nice houses and have all these nice things, and everyone else around them is just left to suffer and starve. And I'm like, okay, I get where it's trying to go with it, but it's just so one note that it just stopped being funny after like 30 seconds into the sketch. Then you have this other thing about this guy who's a hockey player who lost his hands and his legs, and he's in a wheelchair, and it's set up like it's this inspirational story, and it's just a lot of shots of this guy in a wheelchair getting decked onto the ice, and then it goes and uses that as an excuse to just make a lot of really tone deaf, lazy jokes about disabled people. And then you have this other thing about Sloravia and Asmenistan, and this stoner kid who's like a one of those like hippie teens who is trying to talk about peace and love and so on and so forth, and how they should just get along. And the UN actually asks him to help uh, with peace talks, and he successfully manages to get the leaders of Sarabia and Asmenistan to stop fighting and get along and chill and smoke weed. But then, because of the fact that, they just can't stop hating each other for the dumbest reasons, they move on to something else. And this time around, it's one of the other guys taking one of the other guys' weed, and they start fighting over the weed, and then things get just as bad between the two. Then you have this whole thing once again with the news broadcaster on the Onion Nightly News, and him protesting the corporate takeover, and they want him to promote Cockpuncher, but he refuses to do so. And then a bunch of terrorists show up at the news station and take the newscaster hostage. And then you have a bunch of cameos from other characters from different sketches. You get Cockpuncher himself, Steven Seagal. You get Melissa Cherry. You get the Peruvians. And eventually what happens is Cockpuncher prevails and takes out the terrorists. And throughout this entire ordeal, it changes the news broadcaster's perspective on everything. And then the movie basically ends. You have another focus on film bit, though, before the end credits, where they talk about some deleted scenes that were too offensive to put in the movie, which I'm like, but it's in the movie now, though. So I don't understand the structure of that bit. And they show the scenes that were cut, and one of them is just a nun drinking cum, and then another one is a cook a cooking show with this chef played by Meredith Baxter who cooks a live cat. And then the movie is over. And then I'm like, thank God. Because if it was going to go on any longer, it would have made me cry as if I was in a room full of onions. If it's just, it represents, in my opinion, everything about 2000s comedy that sucked. Just the lowest common denominator, lowest effort type of comedy that's just all about, oh, it's funny because of insert race here, or it's funny because it's offensive. I will give it credit for some of the sketches. Some of them were actually not really that bad and actually had some clever writing. But that doesn't make up for the rest of the movie that is mostly terrible and mostly full of lazy, uninspired garbage sketch comedy that I would see on Mind of Mencia or the worst or weakest episode of Mad TV at the time. The cast, I mean, it's not really going to win any awards, but Len Cariou is Norm Archer. I thought he had a good deadpan, and he was definitely well casted as the news anchor. Uh, Larissa Laskin as Dana Dobbs, and Scott Klace as Kip Kendall, the other two news people. They weren't as good as Len Cariou, but they were still fine. Steven Seagal was a lot of fun parodying himself as Cock Puncher. It's honestly one of the best things that he did around that time. Definitely a lot better than the majority of his other direct-to-video direct that he did for years after this movie. Sarah McElligott as Melissa Cherry. Honestly, I felt she was stealing every scene that she was in. She was hilarious. I wish she was in it more because she was really that funny. Brendan Fletcher, who played the white black guy, another character named Tim. Brendan Fletcher was fine. You might recognize him. He was in Freddy vs. Jason. He played one of the teens in that. And then you have just a bunch of other random actors like Paul Scheer, who played the computer salesman. Nick Chinlund, who played Bryce Brand. Which he was a part of one of the worst sketches too. I completely forgot about that sketch. God, that sketch was so bad. It was a sketch about a celebrity who got out of rehab and then became high on life. Get it? Jed Rees, like I mentioned, is the Wizard Proteus. God, he was so funny. Kevin Federline, K-Fed, has a cameo in this as one of the lollipop love dancers. Michael Bolton plays himself. Daniel Day Kim has a role as the mystery party goer. You have Meredith Baxter, who plays a chef on a cooking show. You have Rodney Dangerfield, who shows up at the end and talks about, hey, we're all going to get laid, which is a reference to Caddyshack. And it was his last role, apparently, before he passed away. He was in a lot of really bad films before his death. This is just one of many. But yeah, I mean, the cast is okay, I guess, but it's not really full of a lot of winners or a lot of really standout or great performances. The cinematography by Maurice Alberti and Neil Shapiro. I mean, what can I say about the cinematography? It looks like a cheap webisode. The music by Ash and Spencer sounds like a cheap news broadcast. That's the whole point. And I guess they made that work. The editing by Frederick Wardell. It's not something that I would think is super woeful, but it's not wonderful either. And it's a film that's only like an hour and 20 something minutes, but it drags because, like I said, the format gets old after a certain amount of time because too many of the headlines from the news broadcaster aren't funny. And then you have a lot of the sketches that just bomb one after another after a decent, promising beginning. So, yeah, I mean, unless you're a diehard Steven Seagal fan and you have to see everything that he's in, I really would not recommend this movie, to be perfectly honest. But anyway, that is my rant on the Onion movie. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.